Hello and welcome back to Project 380. In this video, some more wiring. So hopefully you would have seen I've pretty much wired up the engine bay. But now it's time to start wiring up the dash and some accessories. It's a little bit messy in here at the minute, but I haven't been inside the car for a while now. But it is time to start wiring up underneath the dash. Now, as you know, I'm not having a CD player and I haven't got speakers, so this gives us a lot of space for equipment here. But before I start installing equipment here, I need a good supply of power to the dash. Now I just want to start off by saying everything in this area, all this wiring was done when it was in Japan, and there's a few questionable things. This is the plug for the cigarette lighter, and for some reason it's got two Scotch locks. And the wiring for the CD player, well, that's just a mess. And there's a random plug here, which I don't really know what it's for, but I'm going to guess that is the option for the heated seats and whatever other option you have down here somewhere. But anyway, power to the dashboard. Now I need to be running a few things here, so I need a good source of power. The cigarette lighter is a good source of switched live, but it's probably not a good idea to run a few components just off these two wires. There is a good live and negative from the CD player wires, but again, not a lot of power. So these two options are a good supply of a switched live. But I want to get a good amount of power up here, so I'm going to have to go another route. I think my best option for good reliable power up at the dash is to come straight from the battery, using one of my fused slots in my power supply board in the boot. I think I'm going to put a wire straight on there and lead it through the car and route it all the way along to the dashboard. I still can't fully open my driver's door, so I'm going to do this off of camera. I'm actually going to run two wires from my power supply board into the dash, and I'll explain why later on in the video. Well, off of camera, I decided to go a slightly different route. I've got my two wires plugged into my power supply board there, following the rest of the wires into the cab, around the fuel tank, and I've actually come around the passenger side. And that's because there's a nice PVC tube here, which is completely unused. So I've ran them power cables through there, and then into the footwell. Now I may have gone a little bit overboard with this wire. I've used twin core, which has got a hefty amount of protection on it anyway, but I put a little bit of sheathing over top of it to stop it rubbing on anything. The last thing I want is for a power wire to rub through. So now I'm going to tuck it up in the footwell, out the way of the ECU and feet, and then to the center console. That's tucked neatly out of the way and to the center console now. This wire, because it's essentially coming straight from the battery, is now permanently live. And I don't want that. And I also need a way of distributing the power. So I've made a little distribution unit. I've made a bracket holding a fuse box, which is connected to a relay. This relay is going to hook up to some sort of switched live down there, probably the cigarette lighter. So this unit only powers on when the key is on. And I've designed this to sit just behind the center console there. So all I've got to do is pop the glove box all the way down to gain access to those fuses. This is going to be a bit of a pain to wire up behind the center console. But essentially all I'm doing is taking one of those wires that are fed from the boot, connecting it up to the relay, earthing the relay to the chassis, and connecting a switched ignition to the relay. Well, I decided that if I needed to do any maintenance, I would like a little bit of excess wire. But that's all connected up now. All I need to do is bolt it into the center console, but I have got something to add to this later on. So that's just going to hang around in the footwell for now. But that means we've got power up to the center console, but we now require an earth. And because I'm going to have a few things here that actually require an earth, instead of joining everything together all to one earth, I'm going to try and make my life a little easier. If at a later date I add something, I want it to be easy to add something. So I've made myself a little earthing block with some M6 holes in it that can bolt right up to the center console in there. I've already cleaned the metal on the center console to make a good earth. This is going to be a little bit of a pain to bolt in though, but once it's in, it's in. And that sits nice and neatly down there like that. Now I was quite concerned this wouldn't be a good enough earth, but if we get the trusty multimeter, I'm going to put that here and touch the earth bracket. Yep, I'd say that's a good enough earth. So I've got a switched live and an earth. which means I don't need any of the CD player wiring anymore. So I'm going to chop that off, blanket and tuck it away in the center console, just so that's a little bit less spaghetti to worry about. And of course I've not got a radio. So if I've not got a radio, what am I powering up here? Well, that's where this Jass Performance double DIN blank with gauge holes come into play. This fits straight in here where the CD player would go. And this is going to allow me to run 3 gauges. And I've got a bit of extra space down here. I don't know how everything gets so dusty in my garage. So the 3 gauges, they all need their own power and ground, but I'll be installing them separately in a different video. I've already got 2 gauges. I've got the AEM air fuel gauge. I've got the boost gauge, but I want your opinion what I should put in the 3rd hole. So the gauges for now are going in at a later date, but the power and ground are there ready for them. Well, I got a little bit carried away off of camera and installed the new boost gauge. I've gone for a Turbo Smart one, which is backlit, which is simply a positive and negative in the back of the gauge. So I have extended the wires a little bit, so I can take this panel in and out without ripping any wires out. I've put a ring terminal on the end of the earth to go to the earth block in the center console, and a spade connector on the positive to go to the power supply unit. So that's earthed back there to the earth block, hooked up to the power supply unit. I suppose it's time to test it. I've put a 5 amp fuse here because that's only powering a small bulb, and a 30 amp back in the boot as it may be powering a lot up front. So let's turn that isolator switch. Check we've got power, and attempt to find my keys. Let's give it a go. That's working great, just how I wanted. Man, I miss this sound. With this all working how it should, I am going to remove that fuse and turn off the isolator, as there's a lot more wiring to do and I don't want any accidents. So that's the power supply unit working as it should, and I know the rest of the gauges are going to be nice and simple to install. Now it's onto this empty space to fill it with some accessories. Now this next little section is nothing to do with the power supply unit, but it's still wiring. I'm going to solve an issue I've created myself. Now I'm not running this part of the center console where the armrest is, and that's created a little issue. On the Mark II, the window switches are here. So what do I do with the window switches? This unit is pretty bulky. It's far too bulky to integrate into this, and there's not really anywhere else to put it. But if you take away the auto function, this is pretty simple. So I've got myself a couple of on-off-on rocker switches, which I think will mount nicely here. All I've got to do now is work out how to wire these in to the original window switch plug, which should be fairly simple as it's only 6 wires. It took a while to work out, but I think I've got it sussed. So let's pop the key back in and see whether it works. No. Well, after quite some time, I finally worked out what I had done wrong, and now I think I've got it sorted. So how I've wired this up is fairly simple. You've got 6 wires for the window switch harness. Now this is a Mark II, so I don't know whether it's different on different models, but we've got brown, which is our live, blue with a black stripe, which is our earth, white with a red stripe, and green with a red stripe, that's for the driver's side window, and red with a green stripe, and red with a black stripe, which is for the passenger window. So the brown positive and the black and blue negative I have split off into 2 wires going into 2 separate switches. These switches are 6 pole on and off toggle switches, which basically means there are 6 inputs in the back, and the switch, when you switch it, instead of staying in the on position, returns to the center of position, and the same going the other way. So the positive from each switch goes from one of the top poles to the opposite bottom pole, and the same with the negative, from the top pole to the bottom opposing pole, and then the 2 center poles are the wires that lead to the window motors, and that's exactly the same on the other switch, but with the wires that go to the other door. With those all working, I've now got to drill some holes in here to mount the switches. That's the 2 window switches put in the Jass Performance panel now, and I've just tidied up the wiring with a little bit of tester tape just to make it a little bit neater behind this. I've put the window switches over the passenger side. It'll be easy for me to reach around the gear stick and the hydro to use the windows, and it's nice and easy for the passenger to use, especially if they feel a little bit queasy while I'm drifting. Now, because the wires for the window switches are now routed behind the center console rather than round the gear stick and back here, I'm going to have to extend the wire that goes to the handbrake back here, as it doesn't quite reach anymore. And someone's already cut it up, So one more connection won't hurt. But this handbrake wire, when you pull the handbrake up, activates a switch back here to illuminate the handbrake light on the dash. So I'm just going to extend that a couple of inches so it could be tucked underneath this carpet and to the handbrake. I just neatened that up with some tester tape just in case it pokes out of the carpet. You won't be able to notice it as much, but it's all tucked up out of the way now. Time to put some extra switches in the Jass performance panel for some extra accessories. I've just put 3 in for now, as I know there's 3 accessories I want. I've left a little bit of space to the right and a big space between these switches and the window switches. You'll see why in a minute. But I've started wiring these switches up. 2 of them are going to go to the power distribution unit, but the switch with the purple wires, they're going to go to a permanent live for some underglow in the future. But I think that's looking really neat. Talking about permanent lives, so I ran 2 wires from the boot, and one of them I'm actually going to use as a permanent live. As in a live power source that I don't need the ignition to be on to be able to use. And that's mainly to power this relay, which is the most Chinese relay I have ever seen, but this is the only one I could find that met my needs. So this is a delayed off relay, and I'm not sure whether you can see on camera, but it does actually say 60 seconds. So I want this relay to send power to my second fan, which isn't wired up to the first fan. The first fan still works as normal, which is linked into the temperature sensor of the engine. But when I was wiring up this engine bay, I ran a wire for this second fan all the way into the car, which is here. So now I need to join this up to the delayed off relay, connect this up to the permanent live, and put a switch to it. That's the relay mostly wired up. We've got our live coming straight from the battery to the relay, and I've also joined the purple wire, which will go to the other permanent live switch, a yellow wire to go to a switch to turn the fan on, and from the switch a brown wire back to the relay, then from the relay to the fan, and the relay is earthed to our power distribution unit. All I've got to do now is connect a switch to the brown and yellow wire, and install a switch right here. Like that, just a nice simple push button, and I added an LED above it to let me know when the fan has turned off. So I think I'm going to install this into the center console now and see whether all this wiring works. Well, I need to find new clips to go in these holes here to hold that onto the center console. So for the minute, it's just dangling free. So the keys are out of the ignition at the minute. The isolator in the boot is turned on. So let's press the fan button and see whether it works. Well, that isn't a delay off at all. So I decided to take this relay apart and investigate why it wasn't working. This magnetic coil pulls this plate down, activating the relay, and that wasn't doing anything. So this is complete trash. So while I'm waiting for a different relay to turn up, let's talk about this big hole that I've drilled in the Jass Performance radio blank. Because I've installed this big hydraulic handbrake underneath the center console, I've sort of ruined where the cigarette lighter goes. So if I need to charge anything up or plug my phone in to use as a sat nav, I now haven't got anywhere to plug in. So I've drilled this big hole for a 4-way USB socket, 2 USBs and 2 USB-Cs, and in the center you'll see an LCD screen which doubles up as a voltmeter. And even when I've got the flap closed, the center is clear so you can see the voltage. This is nice and simple to wire up, just a simple positive and negative, and it just clamps onto the panel with this ring. That looks pretty neat, I'm happy with that, and I've left some space around it if I need to add anything else in the future. So I'm going to take the positive and negative wire, negative to the earthen block, and the positive straight to the power distribution unit. I've just put a 10 amp fuse in it, as that's what this came with. That looks pretty good. I was quite worried the blue lights were going to be a bit bright, but that's not overpowering at all. Well, it is a little bit brighter if you lift the flap up, but I'm pretty impressed with that. I managed to find the screws and the clips that hold this in. Now all I've got to do is wait for a new delay off relay so that I can carry on with the wiring. Okay, my head hurts. This got a little bit complicated. The Chinese delay off relay that was sitting beside this relay has now gone, and it's been replaced with this. I managed to find a delay off module with an inbuilt 30 amp relay, and this is where it gets a little bit complicated. This board needs a constant positive and live, which is the red and black down here, a constant positive supplied to the relay here, and then this slot here goes straight to the radiator, which is the yellow wire. But then it needs a switch to turn this board on, which is this yellow wire here, which goes to the button that I installed, but that is actually a switched earth. So the brown wire that I did install on that switch is now going to earth, so that switch now switches an earth. So joined into that yellow wire is the positive wire for my LED, so that I know when the fan's running. And joined into the constant positive for the relay is my purple wire that goes to my permanent switch, and a red wire that goes to a switch that I'm going to hide. This is my emergency switch, so I could turn the circuit board off if I really need to. I'm going to hide this out of the way because this is only for an emergency, or if I'm going to be storing the car for a very long time. Because this board is connected to permanent live, it's constantly drawing about 6 milliamps, which isn't a lot, but if I've left it for a long period of time, it may drain the battery a little bit. But that switch connects our permanent live from our relay to the permanent live to supply the board. So let's give this a go. Well, the lights come on and the fans come on, and the fan is pulling the right way. It's pulling air through the radiator. So at least I know I've wired that part up right. Now we've just got to wait for that to turn off. There we go. So that was about 50 seconds. Now there's two downsides to this board. It is a variable timer board, but instead of a screw type potentiometer, where you just adjust it with a screwdriver, on the back, right down here, if the camera will focus, there is 6 different slots of solder, and you actually have to solder and unsolder those to determine how long this relay stays on for, which is a bit of a pain, but I think 50 seconds should do. And the only other downside to this board is the fact that it's an open exposed circuit board. So I've now got to make something for that to sit in. Being a permanent live, I really don't want it rattling about in there and shorting out on anything. Well, you know how I don't like to hide anything on this channel. I've neatened this up and found a box for it to go in. But this is actually a box a clay bar comes in. It just so happens to be that that's all I had laying about. But that could be shoved up in the center console somewhere, out of the way, and now I know it's not going to short out on anything. I've gone ahead and neatened up the wires as much as I can. But now I think it's time to put all of this together, put all the wires in their homes, tuck all the wires up out of the way, mount and earth the power distribution module to inside the center console, and hopefully this is all going to look neat and tidy, and you won't see any of this spaghetti. That's starting to look pretty good. Obviously not quite finished yet. The power distribution block with relay is bolted to the center console now, really tucked up out of the way there. Obviously there is going to be a glove box hiding it, but that's not going in just yet. Obviously there are some wires down here in the footwell, but that is for the AEM gauge, which I'm yet to wire up. That'll be coming soon. And obviously, I've got some ECU wiring to do. I'm not going to be putting the heater controls in just yet, or the center console surround, as this has got to come in and out a few more times. I've still got a few more things to wire up behind this. I've got these 2 gauges to wire up, and a third one, but let me know what you think the third one should be in the comments down below. I've still got to cut up my center console surround, as there's now a hydro in the way, but I have got one problem. Right here, the AEM gauge is quite thick. It's slightly bigger than the other gauge, and it's actually sitting on it. Camera can't quite pick it up. So I think the solution will be to shave one of these gauges down. But what I don't want to do is shave one down just yet. I want to be able to sit in the driver's seat, in the position where I would be, and make sure I can see this AEM gauge. Obviously I have got a hydro in the way, and this is quite an important gauge. So before I shave anything down, I want to be happy that I want this gauge in this gauge slot rather than this one. But I can't sit there at the minute, and that obviously all depends what gauge I want to put here. So this will all come in the near future. It's almost there, but not quite done. Everything works as it should. The Windows switches work, and they're in a nice accessible place. I've got a nice voltmeter, which doubles up as a USB slot. I've got 3 switches, which you'll see me wire up in the future. I've got a working boost gauge and a working air fuel gauge, and I've got a working cool down fan. Wired up to a delay off relay, and I'm really happy with all of this. Just a little bit more to go. So that is all for this video. I'm really starting to feel like I'm getting somewhere now. If this video helped you do some custom wiring in your center console, let me know in the comments down below. As per usual, like, comment, share and subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next one.